If you force an employee to make a choice between their caregiving role and their work role, no matter what they do or say, eventually the workplace will lose. Like, just
I
period.
think that's so spot on and so true. And such a good thing for people to remember when they're thinking about making these kinds of choices. Imagine dropping your kids off at school, rushing to the office for back-to-back meetings, and then leaving early to take your aging parent to a doctor's appointment. Later that night, after the emails are done and the laundry is folded, you're sitting at the kitchen table paying daycare bills, fees for your kids' sports teams, and medical bills for your mom's last doctor visit, and sitting there trying to figure out how you're going to make it all work. That's what life looks like for millions of working caregivers who fall into the sandwich generation, a term that refers to people who are caring for both children or other young dependents and aging relatives at the same time. Caring for both children and aging adults often means constant exhaustion, financial strain, and an overwhelming pressure to be everything to everyone, all while trying to succeed at work. Welcome to Honest HR, where we turn the real issues facing today's HR departments into honest conversations with actionable insights. I'm your host, Marjorie Morrison. Let's get honest. According to SHRM's research report, Care and Careers, Navigating Caregiving and Work Responsibilities, 1 in 4 workers cares for both elderly adults and children. And almost 50% of total participants in the study said being a caregiver had a negative impact on their mental health. So today, we're going to unpack how sandwich generation caregiving affects overall well-being, what programs, benefits, and policies HR can use to make a difference, and the steps HR departments can take when confronting difficult realities. Joining us is Marvell Adams Jr., CEO of Caregiver Action Network, the nation's leading family caregiver organization. Welcome to Honest HR, Marvell. We are so excited to have you, and I'm just so looking forward to this conversation about understanding being a sandwich generation caregiver.
Yeah. Marjorie, thanks so much for having me. This is really a pleasure to participate.
So when we talk about sandwich generation caregivers, it's easy to oversimplify it as employees who care for children and adults. But the reality is it's much more complicated than that. So I want to just dive right in. What does this responsibility look like for this group? And how does it differ from the challenges of other caregivers?
For the sandwich generation in particular, sometimes also called Gen X, and so the generation between millennials and baby boomers, typically, is what we're talking about. There's this kind of a bringing together of stressors that I think, individually, every generation experiences. So raising kids is hard. Caring for a loved one that may be aging or have a special need is challenging. Attending to one's own self-care and what you need to just to be able to be a full human, is sometimes elusive for folks. But what we talk about when we say Generation X or sandwich generation caregivers is that they are in a role where they are doing all of that at the same time, and really many times because they don't have a choice otherwise, and so you think of the situation where maybe you have a kid and maybe that child has some special needs, whether a developmental disability or some sort of disease or condition that you're helping manage and being a caregiver for beyond what would be considered kind of quote unquote normal parenting, whatever that means,
Right.
That by itself, that's you're giving a lot of yourself and time, as a parent doing that. Or if you are an aunt that's caring for, a nephew that you have custody of or responsibility for, any way you want to look at it. But then you also have at the same time for sandwich generation, thus the sandwich piece of it is someone older in your life that you are also caring for. And that could be because they live in, an in-law suite in the backyard. That could be because they are on the other side of the country and you're a long distance caregiver, really seeing to their needs and coordinating stuff, or, anything in between. And so what makes that sandwich generation so unique is that, one, they're dealing with these things all at the same time. Plus, doing that at the time in their professional careers many times, because many of these individuals in sandwich generations are also working during their professional time where they're also peaking in their professional careers. And so you feel like bringing all these things together, and not really until recently a recognition of that's a thing. And so then when we talk about sandwich generation caregivers, that's really what we mean by it, because it's bringing together such difficult pieces of just life. But then the last thing I'll mention to you is that we also are now tipping the scales in the sense of the number of individuals that are 65 and over in our country and the number of individuals that are under the age of 18, where it used to be, that's how, our ability to care for individuals is really impacted, because half of the U.S. counties, half of the counties of the United States right now, they have more individuals in the age of 65 plus than they do in under age 18. And that will be a statistic for the entire United States by 2035.
Wow. God, what an interesting way to frame that. I did not realize that. So thank you so much for that background. When we think about this generation, these sandwich caregivers, which makes so much sense. And then bringing it back to the workplace, how does that affect productivity and just engagement at work?
Yeah, I'll start again with just a couple statistics, because data shows that 60% of caregivers work full time. And so the kind of the notion of one individual, if there's a couple working outside the home and one staying at home, and then you've got this person that is a homemaker, and so that notion is really a fallacy in today's climate. So 60% of caregivers work full time, meaning and you add to this that 1 in 5 caregivers miss 10 or more hours of work a week.
Oh, a
So
week?
a week. When you start to add up, so and when people hear that, they go, "How is that possible? Like, how could you keep your job?" Well, think about if you take that call on your lunch break, or a call during work where you're trying to get a hold of somebody at school. You're on hold for a little bit. You're trying to follow up on an insurance claim for your mom that came through, and you're trying to figure that out. All these little things add up, and then you add to that somebody gets sick, someone has a fall. And so over averages, over time, that really does start to add up. And then you put into their doctor's visits and things of that sort. And so it really is highly impactful on an ability for somebody to show up as their full selves at work, and the aggregate in the US, when you add up absenteeism, when you add up people going from full-time to part-time so they can be a sandwich generation caregiver more directly, or just those interruptions that take place, studies show between 17 and 34 billion in economic loss per year because of that loss of productivity in our economy. So it's a huge part when you start to think of the number of individuals that are caregivers out there supporting individuals, and many times doing it not only unpaid, but at a financial burden many times because of what it takes to really be a caregiver.
Wow. So for HR, right? We now understand this, and we have, to deal with it at work. How can they identify when these employees might be silently struggling? Because it sounds like this is something they're not sharing. And that's got to be so much stress. So what can we do to identify it?
That is a great question, Marjorie, because many times we caregivers are referred to as like the invisible caregiver, that person that just is behind the scenes, is not, looking for accolades necessarily. They're doing it because they feel it's what they should and need to do. So one, I think from a workplace perspective, and particularly as human resources professionals, I think there's a need to, one, know your people, which we all know. Know your people first, so that when you do see a change, you actually recognize it as being different from what you normally see. This person showing up. You've been late lately. You've been, seeming tired. What kind of things? And so being able to, one, have an environment that welcomes people sharing, and allowing it in different ways. Because sometimes people say, well, you can just let your supervisor know if you have an issue. Well, what if they don't feel comfortable going to their supervisor and they feel as if maybe they won't get the hours they want because they asked for that time off or they want a modification in their schedule. So understanding that providing staff or employees different avenues, whether it's maybe something to send to an external EAP program to say, you're having trouble with family caregiving and need some accommodation, whether it's talking to HR within your organization or talking with your supervisor, but providing the environment that is welcome and that you want to know about these things, because ultimately being able to show up for your employees means caring about their well-being. And because 60% of people, 60% of caregivers are working, that's a huge number of individuals in the workforce that really need to be managed in a way that's going to be sensitive to what they have going on.
So, so when you say that, sometimes they're not going to share or they're not comfortable sharing, we always have these like privacy types of issues. What if someone's like picking up the signs in HR? Like, how can they bring it up without making them feel like they're overstepping that?
Yeah. Yeah. It's twofold. It's one, it's hopefully not that hopefully that won't be the first conversation, that they've had with them in a while. And so being able to check in. But also when you notice that kind of thing, being able to come from a position of care and support. In other words, saying to them, hey, not sure what's going on, and I'm open for you to share as much or as little as you'd like. But this is what I'm noticing, and my observation is that's not like you. Is there something we can be doing? Is there any way we can support you? And quite frankly, before asking what's going on, inquire about, would you mind sharing? And let them really be able to answer yes or no to that and it be okay. And if they say no, being able to, if you have availability, which most workplaces do, if you have an EAP program or someone that they could maybe contact independently and anonymously outside of the organization, offering that, not leaving it, as a done deal, but making sure to check in. Hey, appreciate you being candid. I'm going to check back in you in a month or so, if that's okay. And if you want to share, then great. And if you don't, that's fine too. But it takes building that culture that where people feel comfortable, and when they're not, making sure that you give the impression that the organization wants to hear from you. And if you're not comfortable, that's something for us to work on too.
I love the way that you just frame that, because we talk a lot about empathy and curiosity. And it was like you just brought both of them together. Be curious and ask the questions, but at the same time, do it with a lot of empathy, which is, how are you doing? Share, with me what's going on. Ask questions, and not in a way that's making somebody feel defensive or they have to hide something. So that was like really beautifully said. So when we think about training and educating, I mean, I would imagine like how there's an element of this, like for you to tell us 60% of caregivers are working full time, or, one out of five are missing 10 hours a week at work. To me, that's like, you just taught me and us something new. How do you recommend that we educate managers and coworkers on how to better understand the responsibilities that these caregivers are managing?
Yeah, it's a part of it is really adding it to, frankly, the curriculum, in the sense of and I give you, two kind of examples of that. SHRM, knowing that there are resources available that are focused on education and understanding of working caregivers, as well as, Caregiver Action Network, the organization I serve. We actually have a caregiver ready workplace program where we will work with employees, or employers, should I say, to provide training, because some of that training is intuitive, but not all of it, because even though most people understand what the role of a caregiver is, it's unique to each individual. For someone, it may be what they think is a light lift, going on lunch break to take mom to the doctors and thinking, oh, that's it. But we know it's much more in depth to that. And so, the workplace, it really has to be something that provides support and guidance and assistance specific to their caregiving needs. Uh, a supervisor recognizing and supporting that they're a caregiver. And these are things that we've heard directly from caregivers, what they say their need in some of the case studies we've done. And then really having caregiver-centric benefits, like child and elder care, or respite, or flexible schedules, or even remote working conditions. But at the end of it all, being able to educate HR professionals on what that looks like, and to be able to empower them to educate supervisors and managers, which we know people stay or go based on their supervisor. This is the culture we're trying to build with our community, and we want to really be inclusive of the needs of caregivers. And so there's a piece of this where people understand mostly if you got a kid thing. Kids sick at school, at home, that kind of stuff. COVID brought that really to the front street. People understanding, oh, you guys have lives when you go home from work. Like, that's amazing. That understood. But and we're getting there, I think, more when it comes to the needs of sandwich generation folks. But I think it really behooves HR professionals to learn. There's a whole body of evidence out there that can show that understanding and investing in a caregiver ready or caregiver friendly workplace has a return on investment, just like I told you, in the billions that it costs us each year. And so, what I advocate for as a leader at Caregiver Action Network is, one, if you're not sure where to start as an employer, come talk to us. And what I love about what SHRM provides is that ongoing infrastructure for continuing education units that allow HR professionals to come together and learn more things like this.
It's really interesting to me as I'm in the role at SHRM as executive in residence for mental health or well-being. And I often say that mental health is a cut across all things. And I always say, like, mental health is not one thing, right? Like, we tend to put it off to the side, but it's not. And I feel like caregiving is the same thing. It's like a perpendicular to whatever it is that we're talking about. You have to add on the dimension of that someone could be a caregiver. And when we look at some of like the most recent SHRM stats in a 2025 mental health survey, 1 in 4 organizations, so a quarter, focus more on prevention of mental health rather than reacting to them. So that's a start. It's better than it used to be. And ideally, that's going to become the norm, right? Not the exception. But what kind of workplace resources or programs have been effective, right? What have we done that, is helping support the caregivers in addition to with their mental health and well-being? Are there things out there that are working?
Yeah, no, that's a great question because they really do go hand in hand. And so, in thinking of ensuring that the benefits, have true mental health care parity, alongside the healthcare. And so that, that it is not an arm and a leg to see a psychologist or a therapist, or a specialist, and making sure that that's accessible to individuals in the organization. Two, we found great success with helping set up employee resource groups specifically for working caregivers, and knowing that when you set up a construct like you would for other affinity groups in the organization, you then create this space for it becomes a real thing. So, okay, the organization is recognizing this as a thing. Okay, good. And then two, it provides a space for individuals, like you said, caregiving and mental health, and it goes across so many aspects of it. So you end up with affinity groups that really do have all aspects of the organization there, because I guarantee you that the leadership across, any organization within our audience right now, their senior leadership, a third to a half of them are currently or just recently dealt with a caregiving situation, and they get it. And the same thing for mid-level managers, the same thing for direct care staff, across the board. And so there also is this opportunity to create those employee resource groups that provide support, that provide peer-to-peer connection, which many times we hear at the end of the day, that's what caregivers are looking for. Like, they're up for the job of being a caregiver, but they also, want to understand that 10:30 at night, there's somebody else out there that is also just sitting down for the first time,
Right.
and getting back up in 6 hours or so. And so being able to have that type of construct And at the very least, finding ways to augment your EAP program, so at least that way there are aspects of that provide, and then, the ongoing education, not just for the HR professionals, but for across the organization. So there really is a depth of understanding about caregiving in the workplace.
I love the ERG model or affinity group because I totally agree with you. We see so much benefit from peer support, right? Like with, I'm not alone. I'm not the only one dealing with this. There's just something about commiserating that makes us feel like we can do this and to be able to support each other. Is that, I just don't know this answer. Is that common to have caregiver ERGs now? Or is that still kind of an up and coming thing?
Yeah, I think it's growing because and again, I think what one catalyst was COVID, that people really understanding that, okay, we're on a virtual meeting just like this, and realizing, oh, that's right, I heard about that kid you had, but now I'm seeing, in real life. And so it's one thing that we've really been a proponent of, to the point of, really putting programmatically some dollars behind having something that is turnkey for employers to be able to adopt and work with us on. But it's definitely growing. There's organizations and companies out there that are, from a care tech or age tech perspective, are making it easier to navigate some of the challenges of caregiving. We, as the only running the only national help center for caregiving, where people can either dial in through a toll-free number, they can email, or they can do a web chat through caregiveraction.org, where all of our resources are. That provides an opportunity for ERGs to not feel as if they're just making things on their own. Like, they have resources that we can help them, with. But it's also just recognizing that, when individuals are able to know and understand their loved ones are attended to and well taken care of, they really can show up at work. And what I always say to folks is that any organization, if you force an employee to make a choice between their caregiving role and their work role, no matter what they do or say, eventually the workplace will lose. Like, just
I
period.
think that's so spot on and so true. And such a good thing for people to remember when they're thinking about making these kinds of choices. So when they are thinking about the choices and the benefits, are there, like, what have you seen make the biggest difference, like, on really how to help people manage these competing demands? Because that's really what it is, right? You have competing things going on at all times.
Exactly. And that is, part of the heart, given our mission at Caregiver Action Network, that's really the heart of our work of providing, no cost tools and solutions that can help individuals really navigate their caregiving journey. Because again, it also isn't just a one and done thing. It's cyclical. For many people, it's lifelong. Every individual that works at Caregiver Action Network and every individual on our board either has a current caregiving journey going on, or one in their past. And statistics will say if they're in neither of those categories, eventually they'll be in one of those categories. And so recognizing that from a policy standpoint, we really want to be able to have the ability for caregivers to be educated on what their rights are, and understanding, like, this is, again, conversations about FMLA and understand what that means. But it also is conversations about, what are we saying to staff members when we say, yes, you can take that time, but you're going to be unpaid. So then let's have a conversation about, what does paid time off really look like in this new age? If people are, for instance, using all their vacation time, up for caregiving, that's the kind of, optics we need to be able to have sight on. But the things that I've seen that really are helpful from managing those competing demands are tools that provide a caregiver navigation, for lack of a better word. And so what that means is something, whether it's technology, whether it's, calling our toll-free number, but helping individuals easily find answers to the questions they have. Because what we've seen over and over again is that, like, right now, you could go on our website and probably find a toolkit for every single thing under the sun for caregiving. But you're not looking for it until you need to. And when you look for it, you're overwhelmed already. And so what we find is helpful is that for a workplace to have resources that a person can be directly pointed to make that journey a bit shorter. Because what we find over and over again, people say, I wish I'd have known about you sooner. I wish I'd have known about you sooner. And we go, us too, but the point of that, what we take away from that is that people really, you're not studying up on being a caregiver 6 months to a year before your caregiving journey starts, because odds are you don't know what's coming. And so being able to have those competing demands managed by knowing you have a reputable source within your employment situation that you can go to. Like I said, starting with the ERG, or knowing you have a suite of resources that you can utilize as a benefit, whether it's paid time off, whether it's an elder or child care benefit, or even just recognizing that the mental health support is affordable and accessible.
I'm sure too that maybe in the beginning they came and they were like, where have you been? But then the next time they need something, they know you're there. Or, it becomes sometimes it's what right? So as time goes on, or these ERGs become more popular, people are sharing them, and then they're learning earlier before they're in crisis mode. So I'm optimistic that as time goes on, more people will know about these things. You mentioned policy. Are there any policy changes that need to happen or that could benefit?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, we get thousands of calls a year and emails and web chats from our national caregiver help desk. 50% of the people that reach out to us or engage with Caregiver Action Network's help desk are calling about financial issues.
Oh,
And that really is at the forefront of their mind, because it's a confluence of a lot of things. One, who among us right now knows everything about, if your parents are still with you, everything about their finances and where everything is and who has now. And then you got to figure it out when there's a problem going on. And so people are in kind of an overwhelmed, frantic mode. Two, caregiving has a cost to it. Thousands of dollars per year that caregivers are putting out above and beyond their own needs to support a loved one in some way. And so policy changes that we think have worked and are needing more across the U.S. is avenues for compensation as a caregiver, so that you, one, can take the time you need to be a caregiver and be compensated, and also having state and federal level policies that make that type of caregiving situation plausible. So FMLA covers most of those situations, depending on the relative and who that person is. But there are ways that it could go further to be able to guarantee access to benefits for the individual, and understanding that because they are doing a caregiving role, that's when they need the support the
right,
most,
right,
and
right,
that's when
right.
they're going to really be reaching out. And then lastly, there have been some changes in laws around um, uh, being able to recognize yourself as a caregiver. But what needs to happen further is really, tax credits that allow for caregiving deductions. Because again, one statistic I was looking at the other day, long distance caregivers, meaning the person that is in Maine and their loved one is in California, they actually spend the most out of pocket on caregiving, because many times they're sending money home, or they're trying to help the other caregiver that's primary to support them by sending money home. And those numbers can be like $8,000+ a year as a long distance caregiver. And you take into consideration what it takes living in your home. I mean, it just really starts to add. So that's a big piece of being able to recognize the economic impact across our country, and that helping people now with caregiving and respite care actually keeps people out of the hospital as well.
It makes a lot of sense, everything you're saying. So we've talked a little bit about how organizations can support their employees. But Marvell, there are some harsh realities that HR has to juggle. And I'd love to just kind of tackle these head on. Because this is tough stuff, right? So what about if an employee's performance starts to dip because of, the repercussions of all of these extra responsibilities? How are we supposed to address that for HR?
Yeah. You're right. It really is a tough and uncomfortable question. And it goes back to having the policies in place that allow for that flexibility so that when that conversation happens with the employee about, I'm seeing a change in your performance. Let's talk about what's going on. The conversation needs to come with it a policy that's backing up the flexible schedules, and a policy that's backing up the ability to job share, a policy that's backing up, really a caregiver centric model that allows that employee to stay engaged and retained within the organization. In the absence of that, you really are relying upon, your kind of your regular progressive disciplinary process, which nobody wants to start for someone because they're a caregiver. And so what I offer to folks always is saying, when you see that dip, have the conversation as early as possible, but be ready to offer something in support. Because if you can't offer something in support, it's almost like you asked what was going on and brought up what the problem was without really offering some help of the person really traversing it. And so that's usually when I think of what that initial conversation to look like. Over time, it may become something that requires a heavier hand, but, I think that doesn't get to that point if you have the caregiver-centric policies in place.
Makes a lot of sense. So SHRM has done a care and careers report. And in it, the participants said they felt their caregiving responsibilities held them back from advancing their careers. So if we have a caregiver who feels they're being overlooked for promotion because of their responsibilities at home, how do you recommend that HR address it effectively while, again, still protecting both the employee and the organization?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great question, Marjorie. And, I think one aspect of that is what I refer to as caregiver sponsors. Being able, so we all, understand, how in HR, how sponsors work. So you've got this individual in the organization that is bringing your name into conversations where they may not have normally brought up, bringing your name into the room for those conversations about opportunities. And I believe one of the things that can be effective in an organization is that when you're able to have an environment that recognizes and makes self-identification as a caregiver, accessible and easy, I think you couple that with someone that's willing to be a champion for that individual or individuals around caregiving, so that when those opportunities come up, that those caregivers, are celebrated for the things that they've offered, and advocating for ways to make it more accessible for those opportunities. Because again, if we win ourselves down to, okay, if you're a caregiver, it's kind of hard for you to progress here because we have this ladder this trajectory. That's a disadvantage to the caregiver, but in the long run, it's a disadvantage to the company. Because again, we're talking about a very large portion of the workforce, 60% of caregivers working full time. That's a huge chunk that you really are overlooking. And in my opinion, when you talk about someone that has the empathy, the passion, the dedication to be a family caregiver and work a full or part-time job, that's someone I want to retain,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know?
yeah.
And
That's
so
right.
and so knowing that because they have maybe had to reduce their hours, it's because of that need, but knowing that the skill set they have and the caregiver sponsor being able to say, in that meeting, actually, I think we should give Marjorie a really good shot at this and maybe allow her to work a hybrid work environment, even though the job description calls for being in the office, because I think she would hit it out of the park, for us if she was given that flexibility.
That's great. I'm listening to you and you're like a wealth of information, and I can tell that this is what you work on every day, all day long. And so we're so lucky that you're putting all of your time, energy, and resources around this. So for you, when you look ahead, right, how do you see the needs of the sandwich generation employees evolving? And what should organizations do now to prepare for that, of what's coming next?
Yeah, yeah, that's a great question, and we've been giving a lot of thought that here at Caregiver Action and amongst our peer organizations, and we firmly believe that the evolution of the caregiving conversation is really turning to intergenerational caregiving. And what I mean by that is, the notion of supporting, and I'll just say this as candid as I can, the woman in the family as the caregiver is really, has to go away, because that's not really where it should just land. Caregiving really has to be supporting a care circle, because it does take a village. I mean, it's a very kind of American problem we have of like having, this lack of community around caring for your elders, and, and the elders being a part of the community in a way that's really revered. And so, what I really am a proponent of is being able to provide that space where caregivers can have the support they need, but also recognize that you're supporting mom, dad, sister, brother, grandma, grandpa, because all of them, are really a part of this intergenerational caregiving, and the increase of multi-generational households as well. Some of that's economics, and it's hard, it's more expensive to own a house, but some of it also is, gosh, one of the first things that sandwich generation folks do if they can is move mom or dad into their home.
Yep.
And never is that really the ideal option that they thought of. It was it's what they thought they needed to do.
Exactly.
Because they felt that this is going to be the best way. But in that model, if there aren't layers of generations there to perhaps lean in, it becomes much more difficult, to be able to balance that out. And so I think what workplaces really have to get ready for right now is, how do we support the circle around our employee so that employee can show up as their best selves. And that's what's going to be the ability to really retain and recruit great talent, because they're going to demand it.
I love that. Marvell, I can't tell you how much I enjoyed this. Thank you so much for sharing all of your insights and wisdom with us. This was really interesting, and I know it's going to be helpful for so many of us. That's going to do it for this week's episode of Honest HR. We'll catch you next time.
Hello, friends. We hope this week's episode gave you the candid tips and insights you need to keep growing and thriving in your career. Honest HR is part of HR Daily, the content series from SHRM that delivers a daily newsletter directly to your inbox, filled with all the latest HR news and research. Sign up at shrm.org/HR Daily. Plus, follow SHRM on social media for even more clips and stories. Like, share, and add to the comments. Because real change starts with real talk.
SHRM.
This podcast is approved for 0.5 professional development credits, aka PDCs, toward SHRM CP and SHRM SCP recertification. Enter the following PDC activity ID in your SHRM activity portal to log your credit. 26-V6MXU. That's 26-V6MXU. This ID expires on December 1st, 2026.